You hear a title like The Golden Ghetto and the Crypt, and you think, okay, this has got to be a thriller novel, right? But this is real. This is the very secret history of how American power was actually built. And it's a story that kicks off with, well, a whole lot of silence. And that silence, it comes from the very top. We're talking about the President of the United States. When George W. Bush said this, it wasn't just him being clever. This is like the official policy of an organization that has been pulling the strings in American history for almost 200 years. Just think about the 2004 presidential election for a second. On one side, you've got George W. Bush, who was in Skull and Bones, the class of '68, and his opponent, John Forbes Kerry, also from Skull and Bones, class of '66. So the American people, they got a choice, sure, but what kind of choice was that really? No matter who won that election, a member of the exact same tiny super elite secret society was going to be in the White House. So you gotta ask, right? How does that even happen? How did this one secret society, which, by the way, was born from a seriously controversial business, come to dominate American politics so completely? To figure that out, we've got to do what you always do. Follow the money. Okay, so it all starts with what you could call a secret inheritance. And I'm not just talking about money. We're talking about an inheritance of power, of influence, even of an entire imperial mindset. And it was all built on a trade that would totally change the destinies of two world powers. All right, to get this, you have to picture early 19th century China. The Qing dynasty was in charge, and they had this super strict system for foreign trade called the Canton system. Basically, all Westerners were stuck in this one tiny district right on the water, a golden ghetto, you could call it. And this created a huge problem for the West. See, they wanted all this Chinese tea and silk and porcelain, but the Chinese, they only wanted one thing back: silver. Lots and lots of silver. So what do you do when you have this massive trade deficit and the other guy doesn't want anything you're selling? Well, you find something they just can't say no to. And for a group of really ambitious merchants from New England, and trust me, you're going to recognize these family names, that answer was opium. Not just any opium, but Turkish opium. It was a market they could jump into while the British were busy controlling the trade out of India. And the profits, I mean, they were just insane. We're talking profit margins of over 1,000%. This wasn't just a good business move. This was like turning on a fire hose of cash. It was the raw capital that would eventually flood back into America and basically kickstart its entire industrial revolution. So who were these guys anyway? Don't picture some back alley criminals, no. These were the Boston Brahmins, the absolute American elite. Let's meet the original opium kingpins. Okay, so the main player here was a firm called Russell and Company. It was founded way back in 1824, and they were ruthless. They basically created a monopoly on the American side of the opium trade by just swallowing up their competitors. And this brought all these powerful families, the Forbes, the Perkins, the Delanos, all under one big corporate umbrella. It was basically a syndicate built to suck wealth out of China. Now, because the whole thing was illegal, they had to get creative. So they came up with this brilliant scheme called the Linton system. Here's how it worked. The fast clipper ships full of opium, they never even went to the main port. Instead, they'd unload their cargo onto these huge, heavily armed ships that were just permanently anchored miles offshore. Then, back in the city, the deals were done for silver. The buyer would get a receipt, a chit, and then they'd take that chit out to the floating warehouses to pick up their drugs. And this right here is the genius of the whole thing. This system gave them total plausible deniability. The American merchants could look you right in the eye and say they weren't smugglers. Oh no, they were just conducting fair, honorable, and legitimate trade offshore. They'd argue it was the Chinese intermediaries who were actually breaking Chinese law. It was this little bit of moral gymnastics that let them build massive fortunes while creating a massive public health disaster. But that drug money, it didn't just stay in China. It was brought back home, laundered into respectability, and completely transformed. Dope profits became these powerful American dynasties that, would basically go on to define the entire country's financial and political elite. Just look at this timeline. It shows the wild journey of that money. It starts in the 1830s as piles of silver from opium deals in Canton. Fast forward to the 1850s, and that exact same money is now being used to build the foundations of American industry: railroads, steamships, you name it. And then you jump to the 20th and 21st centuries, and what do you see? The descendants of these very same opium traders are now living in the White House. And yeah, let's name some names here. First up, the Delano family. Warren Delano Jr. was a top partner at Russell and Company, basically a top drug kingpin. Well, his grandson was none other than President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Then you've got the Forbes family. John Murray Forbes took his opium cash and became a railroad tycoon, building out the American West. And his direct descendant, John Forbes Carey? I mean, these aren't some distant 6 degrees of separation connections. It's a straight line from the opium trade right to the very top of American power. Okay, so making all that money is one thing, but protecting it, institutionalizing it, making sure it gets passed down for generations, that takes a whole different kind of organization. And that's where the Brotherhood of Death comes in. So the connection gets made official in 1832, right when the family opium business is really taking off. A guy named William Huntington Russell, who was the cousin of the founder of Russell and Company, he comes back from a trip to Germany and co-founds a brand new secret society at Yale, and he calls it the Order of Skull and Bones. And to make sure this little club of theirs would last forever, they set up a legal entity called the Russell Trust Association. Get this, it's a tax-exempt corporation that owns all the society stuff in perpetuity. We're talking their spooky, windowless headquarters in New Haven they call the Tomb, and even a 40-acre private island. So yeah, this isn't some frat house. It's a permanent institution designed for the ruling class. And the whole point of this trust was to create and maintain a network. Think of it like a private placement agency for America's elite. And wow, did it work. I mean, just look at the alumni list. 3 U.S. presidents, countless cabinet members, secretaries of state, titans of Wall Street. And here's a big one, key figures in the founding of the CIA. It makes sense, right? A society built on secrecy would be the perfect breeding ground for spies. You really get a sense of the culture inside this place from one of its most infamous stories. So Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of 2 future presidents, was stationed at Fort Sill. And the story goes that he and his buddies robbed the grave of the Apache leader Geronimo. This document here seems to confirm that they took the skull back to the tomb as a trophy. It's this incredibly powerful symbol of their worldview, right? Just taking power from the people they conquered. But this story, this long history of taking and holding power, it doesn't just stay in the past. It actually echoes right into our world today, and it's leading to what some people are calling a pretty grim karmic reversal. Think about what's happening right now. The United States is being absolutely torn apart by the fentanyl crisis. It's a disaster. And where do the precursor chemicals that are used to make this stuff mostly come from? The People's Republic of China. So it really makes you stop and ask a pretty dark question. Has history just come full circle? I mean, when you put the 2 crises side by side, the parallels are just jaw-dropping. Back in the 19th century, U.S. merchants were the aggressors. China was the victim, and the drug was opium. And that led to what China still calls its century of humiliation. Now, the roles are completely flipped. The source is China, the victim is the U.S., the drug is synthetic fentanyl, and the result is what we're now calling deaths of despair. It's just an unbelievable reversal of fortune. The very same country that was devastated by the world's largest drug trafficking operation, an operation that made America's elite rich, is now the main source of the drugs that are destabilizing its old tormentor. You can call it geopolitical karma. You can call it a dark historical echo. Whatever you call it, you can't deny the connection. And that brings us to one last really chilling idea from the source material. When you look at this whole story, from the opium ships in China to the secret tomb at Yale, all the way to the Oval Office, it suggests a very different kind of inheritance. It's one where the dirty money from one generation doesn't just vanish. No, it gets laundered. It gets legitimized. It gets turned into a permanent structure of power. A world where the sins of the fathers aren't really punished. They're just capitalized, endowed, and ultimately elected to office.